Time is precious. We're all given it, but how we use it is the question. Let's show you what the United Kingdom does with our time. Some use it on inventions that have shaped the world we live in, like the man who wanted to create an information management system accessible to all. You might know it as the World Wide Web, which is where millions saw this icon go viral. I mean, he's adorable, right?
Ready, Freddie? Let's do it.
We're entertaining the whole world. This is a place where we are breaking boundaries in all competition.
It's a new dawn for women's football.
And scoring more goals than ever before. That's 2.85 goals every 90 minutes. That's a lot of cheering. We're creating new worlds. In a place where our imaginations have no limits. We're creating the world of the future, where robots can save lives. Engineers are making 3D printers to make multi-grip bionic arms. It takes 48 hours to craft a single badge, and a fraction of a second for it to pass you by. We're leaving no stone unturned, or should I say, no strawberry unpicked. Bringing new energy to the world. Some are using their time to break world records. That's 1.8 seconds to change tires, to be precise. We are commanding the skies and launching into outer space. 44 years in the making. For a moment, looking back at home, trust him when he says it's worth it. It takes months to write an award-winning thesis, and years to develop the next generation of inventors. That's unrivaled talent finding solutions that will change the world. With unparalleled infrastructure and unique investment propositions, sectors of the future like AI, life sciences, quantum and tech. In fact, we're #1 in Europe for tech, venture capital and unicorns. This is where the past, present and future unite. One might say we're quite productive. How are you spending yours? It's not about how you spend your time. It's about how you invest it.
Hello everyone, and let me add my very warm welcome to you all to the Global Investment Summit 2023. I'm Kamal Ahmed, I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of the News Movement, and it is wonderful to be here, bringing together global capital, UK-based capital, global businesses, UK-based businesses, and policy makers. Welcome, everybody, to the Palace of Hampton Court. One of Britain's finest brands lived here, Henry VIII. Now, Henry VIII knew a bit about investment. He was the man who built the Royal Dockyards, 15 or so miles downriver from here to the east of London, still in use today. He was the inventor of the modern Royal Navy. We had a little bit of beef with Europe in those days, so nothing too much has changed maybe, although not quite as militaristic as a few centuries ago. But we also know that looking after investment is really important. Henry VIII became known as Copper-Nose towards the end of his reign because he didn't look after the public finances. And to try and control the amount of expenditure, he brought down the level of silver in the coinage that was produced by the Royal Mint. Such was the weakness of the silver patina on coins that it rubbed off, and copper showed through, first of all, on his nose. So in the end, to make the right kind of investments for the prosperity of a country, you need to make the right types of decisions. Why does this matter? Because without capital, without business, and without the right policy environment, none of us can work at making the world a better place. I co-founded the news movement 2.5 years ago with William Lewis, my co-founder, Sir William Lewis, my co-founder. And without investors at the beginning of that journey, we could not have started to build our business, to reimagine journalism for the next generation of consumers. From the UK, we now have offices in New York. We now provide jobs for 65 people. We know that journalism is a great export from the UK, whether that's our great news organisations, the Telegraph, the Mail, the Guardian, and many others, whether that's our great broadcasters, the BBC or Sky, or Channel 4 or Channel 5 and ITV. We know that being creative and inventing new businesses is absolutely vital to the lifeblood of not just the UK economy, but the global economy. And we know that investment is necessary to build those new businesses and create those new jobs. So welcome. It's going to be an amazing day of conversations. And to kick us off, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the Right Honourable Kemi Badenoch, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 2023 Global Investment Summit. Thank you to everyone who's travelled from across the globe to be here today to mark the next chapter in this country's future. 2 years ago, at our inaugural Global Investment Summit, we were still in the throes of a pandemic. Yet investors put a near £10 billion vote of confidence in our country because they saw the huge potential for growth that we had to offer. It sowed the seeds for our hugely successful Northern Ireland Investment Summit in September, which put Belfast and Northern Ireland firmly on the global boardroom map. And as a growing science and technology superpower, the Prime Minister held our first ever AI Summit earlier this month to ensure the UK is at the forefront of a pioneering world of artificial intelligence. Now, it won't come as news to many of you in this room, but the UK is already a fantastic place to invest. That's why you're here. We are now third in the world for total inward investment, currently standing at $2.7 trillion, and are the top destination in Europe for FDI projects. We have attracted more greenfield FDI than Germany and France combined. We also have the most valuable tech sector, only the third in the world to reach £1 trillion in value. Last year alone, we created 112,000 jobs in all corners of the UK from inward investment, with many more being created here today. Since the Department for Business and Trade was formed just a few months ago, we have seen even greater investment in this country. In my first few days as Business Secretary, I ushered in a momentous deal for Airbus and Rolls-Royce, providing new aircraft for Air India. In September, BMW announced the transformation of their Oxford Mini plant, which secured 4,000 jobs, with Stellantis pledging £100 million for electric vehicles at Ellesmere Port. Our Investment Minister, Lord Johnson, signed a £10 billion Memorandum of Understanding with Marubeni just last month for green projects. Tata Group have pledged £4 billion to create a new gigafactory site in Somerset, which will transform our battery supply chains and create thousands of jobs. And last week, we saw £21 billion of Korean investment in renewable energy, life sciences, and tech during the South Korea state visit. On Friday, we secured £2 billion from Nissan for their sites in Sunderland, which will help secure thousands of jobs. And that's not to mention the global leadership we are showing in free and fair trade, such as joining the CPTPP trading bloc, ushering in our first post-Brexit free trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand, and unlocking £6.5 billion of fresh export opportunities across 75 markets in the last year alone. We're also taking huge steps to ensure that the UK's manufacturing sector is a world leader in innovation. Yesterday, I launched our £3 billion advanced manufacturing plan, which will invest in the long-term future of our innovative manufacturing industry, by reducing costs and removing barriers to business. This comes off the back of the UK's manufacturing sector, leapfrogging France to become the 8th biggest in the world. But we cannot stand still. The world is changing fast, and the global economy is a very competitive place. So, just months ago, our historic trade deal with Australia came into force. Since then, we've secured £10 billion from IFM investors, £5 billion from Aware Super to turbocharge green transition, infrastructure, tech and life science projects, as well as £100 million from Patrizia for sustainable housing projects. As part of a £12 billion programme, Iberdrola have today confirmed £7 billion for our world-leading renewables sector, with partner groups portfolio companies North Star and Gren committing £1 billion and £500 million for new offshore wind infrastructure and community projects, respectively. And the UK tech scene continues its world-leading charge, with combined investments totaling nearly £6 billion from Microsoft, BioNTech, Yonder, the Ellison Institute, IRA, Oxford Quantum Circuits, and MediaTek. These investments total nearly £30 billion, a colossal vote of confidence in the UK, proving further how we are one of the best places in the world to invest. But I want to take this further. I want the UK to be even more innovative, even more dynamic, and even more successful. I want business to look at the UK and see it as a dynamo for investment, free trade, and growth. I've said that my door is always open. My office is called the Department for Business. I want your ideas on how we can create a more friendly, common-sense regulatory environment, what things we should be doing differently rather than sticking to the status quo. I want to move away from just seeing regulation as the solution and focus instead on solving your problems. The numbers speak for themselves, and at today's summit, you will see why we're already on the path to even greater things. And so I'm delighted to welcome the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to the stage to tell us even more. Thank you.
Good morning. Welcome to Hampton Court Palace and the UK's second Global Investment Summit. Now, my argument today is that the UK is a modern, dynamic, thriving economy. And where better to prove those futuristic credentials than a 500-year-old palace? But this summit is not just a sales pitch for Britain, although you'd better believe that I'm going to give you that. It's also a chance for us to say thank you. I've spent my career before politics in business and finance, and so have many of my top team, including the Chancellor. And we know that it's not governments that grow the economy. It's businesses and investors like all of you. You create jobs, drive growth, generate wealth, and you even take on some of the biggest social challenges we face. And it may be unfashionable to say, but I believe that your success is our country's success. So I'm really grateful to all of you for making the time to be here today. And your presence, your decision to choose to invest in Britain, is a huge vote of confidence in our country's future. And I think you're absolutely right to feel that confidence, because we are setting about making this the best place in the world to invest and do business. Now, I'm unashamedly proud of Britain, and there is a growing momentum right here in the UK right now. Don't just take my word for it. PwC's survey this year of thousands of global CEOs rated the UK the most attractive investment destination in Europe. And you can see that confidence in the decisions that people are making, like Tata, BMW, and just last week Nissan, investing billions into automotive and electric vehicle manufacturing. Or Microsoft, announcing today £2.5 billion for critical AI infrastructure, in addition to all the leading AI labs who already have their European offices here. Or the Ellison Institute of Technology, confirming today a £1 billion investment into their new Oxford site, researching and developing new technologies, including life sciences. And you can see that momentum, too, in our commitment to free trade. In the past year alone, we've secured new investment partnerships with the United States, Japan, and South Korea, worth more than £50 billion. We became only the first
European country to join the fast-growing Trans-Pacific trade bloc, and hugely benefited from the sovereign investment partnership with the United Arab Emirates, deploying over £14 billion into the UK in a little over 2 years. And all of that is why this country is the one with the fastest investment growth anywhere in the G7. So when I say that this country can be the best place in the world to invest and to do business, you should believe me, and believe me because of 3 big competitive advantages that we have. Our low-tax approach, our culture of innovation, and our people. Firstly, tax. The purest expression of this government's economic philosophy is that people and businesses make far better decisions about their own money than any government could. And I believe that allowing you to keep more of the return on your capital, our country becomes more competitive as a place to invest, grow, and create jobs. And make no mistake, we are cutting taxes. Not only do we have the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7, last week we announced that we would make full expensing permanent. That means you can write off the cost of many capital investments in full. It makes our capital allowances regime one of the most generous in the world, and it was the biggest business tax cut in modern British history. And that's not all. We've got lower capital gains tax rates than France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. Some of the most generous tax reliefs on stock options anywhere in the world, and we're cutting personal taxes to 27 million working people too. But while low taxes are crucial, they're not enough on their own to make this country the best investment destination in the world. We're also creating new ideas and turning those ideas into the most exciting companies of the future. And that's the UK's second competitive advantage, our incredible culture of innovation. Now, the story of the United Kingdom has always been about discovery and invention. Ours is the country of Newton, Faraday, Hodgkin, and Lovelace, of Stephenson's steam engine, Darwin's theory of evolution, and the World Wide Web, invented by Tim Berners-Lee, who I'm delighted is attending here today. And that tradition is still very much alive. With less than 1% of the world's population, we have 3 of the world's top 10 universities, the 3rd highest number of research publications, and the 2nd most Nobel laureates of any nation. And we're turning those ideas into incredible businesses up and down the country, with more tech unicorns than any country, bar the US and China, and more venture capital than France and Germany combined. Not that I'm in any way competitive. But at a moment like this, when the tectonic plates of technology are shifting, not just in AI, but in quantum, synthetic biology, semiconductors, and much more, we cannot be complacent. And that's why we're investing record sums of public capital into research and development. Also cutting taxes for all of you that are investing in R&D, and overhauling our listing rules to make it easier for those innovative, growing companies to raise the capital they need. And outside of the European Union, we're delivering agile regulation that is pro-innovation and pro-growth. So whether it's in financial services or life sciences, agri-tech, or our creative industries, innovation is the golden thread running through the British economy. But in the end, the greatest asset to any economy is its people. And that's the UK's 3rd competitive advantage. Here at home, we're delivering a world-class education system. We've already got one of the most highly qualified workforces in Europe. And just as your businesses are having to adapt to the economy of the future, so our skills policies are evolving too, with our new lifetime skills guarantee, which supports adults to retrain at any stage in their careers, with record funding in vocational training like apprenticeships. But we don't have a monopoly on talent in this country. And we recognize that nearly half of our most innovative companies have an immigrant founder. So if you're an innovator, an entrepreneur, a researcher, you should know that the most competitive visa regime for highly skilled international talent is right here in the UK. And let me just give you one example. Our new high potential individual visa means that if you're a young person who's graduated from a global top 50 university, you can just come to the UK and stay here with your family for 2 years to just explore, work, study, invent. Nothing like that exists anywhere else in the world. And it tells you everything about our pro-innovation, pro-growth, pro-business philosophy. So that's the opportunity here in the UK. And that's why you should believe me when I say this is the best country in the world to invest and to do business, because of that unique combination of a competitive tax system, our culture of innovation, and our people. Now, I know people look at summits like this and often say that they're just big talking shots, but let me tell you what we have achieved. This summit has galvanized new investments in the UK economy worth a total of £30 billion, over 3 times as much as the first summit that was held just a couple of years ago. That will support tens of thousands of jobs right across the UK. It will create new growth and new opportunities. And it is a huge vote of confidence in our country's future. So thank you for choosing to be part of that future. Thank you for everything that you are doing for this country. With your support, we can and we will build an even brighter future for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you and enjoy the day.
Already we've started to hear some of the big themes we're going to be talking about today: manufacturing, climate, tech, the regulatory environment. All those things are vital to a good environment for global investment in the UK and elsewhere. Also, of course, the notion of tax and how that works to promote businesses and how they operate. We're going to be moving on now to our first discussion session of today, and it's going to be an absolutely brilliant one. And to introduce that session, Lucy Fraser, the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and in that position, the head and the driver of one of the most important sectors in the UK, the creative industries. Secretary of State, welcome to the stage.
Culture, creativity, talent. Today, we are in a golden age for British culture, one that could rival any other time in our history. In television, UK programmes are being exported across the world. We've had 74 British Oscar winners since 2010. English football is a language that every country in the world seems to be fluent in, attracting fans from Santiago to Seoul. As the Culture Secretary, I'm proud to have portfolio responsibility for our creative industries, including our film, our TV, gaming, music, and fashion industries. Our companies, our innovators, our creators, our artists are putting a British stamp on every creative industry on the world stage. In this room today, we've got some of the people and businesses who encapsulate our reputation for excellence. Music executive Amanda Ghost, an artist who has co-written songs with Beyoncé. Sir Lucian Grange, CEO of Universal Music, who has pioneered new and innovative business models in the industry, whilst signing global superstars and getting a star himself on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Anya Heinmarsh, who made the reusable bag cool and used her creativity to design handbags, but also innovate new sustainable fabrics to make handbags. I believe that although we may be too self-deprecating to admit it, the secret ingredient to our thriving creative industries is in large part innate British talent. Brits have always found ways to challenge convention, to push boundaries, to upend the accepted status quo. Mary Quant's invention of the miniskirt, Johnny Ive's design of the iPhone, Andrew Lloyd Webber, who is one of a select group of people to have received Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Awards. Today, we export that creative zest all over the world in our music, television, film, theatre, fashion, literature, video games, and others. And here at home, that talent is backed by the government at every opportunity. Consecutive Conservative governments have recognised the potential that exists across our creative industry, and they've recognised the enormous dedication and determination of the businesses and people in these sectors. We've been supporting and stimulating our creative industries with tax reliefs for over a decade, from film to animation to video games to theatre. These tax reliefs have helped to attract significant global investment into the UK. And our approach has always been to recognise that we succeed when we work together. It's a partnership. The government cannot guarantee success, but we can help to create the conditions and a framework that fosters it. And when you succeed, we succeed. And working with international partners is an important part of that partnership. Just look at Barbie, a film recorded in the UK that supported 750 jobs, added £80 million to our economy, and earned over £1.1 billion at the global box office. That is what this summit today is all about. Creating partnerships, seizing opportunities to invest, and tapping into that spark of creative British creativity. And as you saw at the autumn statement last week, we are committed to growing our creative industries long into the future, building on our existing foundations and continuing to succeed together. I look forward to talking with as many of you as possible today and in the future about how we continue to do that. And now I would like to introduce Oliver Dowden, our Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, thank you, Lucy, for that introduction. In fact, in this room, you've got a bit of a culture club going on because we have the current Culture Secretary, I served as Culture Secretary, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's in the front row, served as Culture Secretary as well. So if you needed any reassurance about our commitment to the creative industries in this country, you can see it in this room today. And our sector, and this sector, could not succeed without the kind of investment that you've seen from the Chancellor and the commitment that you've seen from Lucy Fraser as Culture Secretary. And it's such a huge pleasure for me to play my role in promoting our wonderful creative industries. And whether it's in the fields of music or sport or theatre or literature or indeed creative endeavours generally, so often, and indeed almost always, the United Kingdom is there at the very top table. And we rightly take huge pride in our creative industries. But of course, it's not just the joy of the creative industries, it's that hard economic edge as well. Just a couple of statistics. The UK creative industries contributed over £100 billion in GVA to the economy last year. Or if you take the stats about exports, over £30 billion worth of creative exports last year. But also, they're a way of showcasing the UK and the people involved in it being ambassadors for the United Kingdom. And that's why it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce this highly distinguished panel of ambassadors for our creative industries. Starting, I think, we'll go in the order I have here. Professor Neil Ferguson, we have Thomas Heatherwick, we have Anya Hindmarsh, we have Lord Lloyd Webber, and we have Richard Masters. And between them, please. And between them, they span the whole panoply of the UK's cultural and creative endeavour. From Sherlock Holmes to James Bond and Harry Potter, these ideas have transformed the UK into the world's largest exporter, for example, of physical books, over 3.8 billion books exported each year, and they're also the foundation of our film and TV industry, which contributes over £12 billion to our economy. And indeed, you can see that. I see this in my own constituency. There's actually an arc that goes through Hertfordshire and northwest London. There's more film and television content produced in that arc than there is in Hollywood. That's a sign of the UK creative industry. So there's a lot for us to discuss. I'm going to ask each panel member to say a few words, and then we'll have a more open discussion. So perhaps I could start with Professor Neil Ferguson, who not only is a renowned historian, author of over 15 books, but also an award-winning filmmaker with an Emmy for his series, The Ascent of Money. Neil, do you want to kick off with some of your initial reflections and how we can continue to leverage our history, our culture, and our creativity?
Well, thank you very much, Oliver. It's a pleasure to be here and in this distinguished company and with the very distinguished audience. I recognize some distinguished faces amongst you. Obviously, it's not the weather, is it, that draws us back to the UK, nor the central heating. I spent most of the last 20 years working in American universities at NYU, at Harvard, and at Stanford. And I think a really striking feature of the landscape, if you look at higher education globally, is that it's dominated by US universities, and the only contenders are the UK universities. You look at all the top 20 rankings, US News and World Report, Times Higher Education, the Chinese rankings. In the top 20, the only non-US universities are Oxford, Cambridge, UCL, Imperial, and I think that strength in higher education is more and more remarkable because the resources of the top UK universities are so much less than Harvard or Stanford have at their disposal. And a really striking thing which has become clear to me in recent years is that some of the pathologies that have arisen at places like Harvard and Yale haven't arisen in the same way in the UK universities. I know there are some Americans here, some friends of mine. We've seen some pretty crazy scenes at the American elite universities in recent weeks. I found them very depressing. You don't really have that going on at the UK universities. They're more meritocratic. There's less of this sense of indoctrination as the purpose of university life. And that's why the universities in the UK are such attractive universities for people from all over the world. You know, Oliver, there's a great debate about the immigration statistics in the country at the moment. 39% of the people who come from outside the EU to the UK are attracted by the universities. They're coming here to study. So I think the UK has an extraordinary thing to boast about, which is that it punches well above its weight in higher education. And I increasingly find the UK universities more attractive than their American counterparts. I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you for that. And I think that's a really important contribution. And actually, it's not just in the creative industries. If you look, for example, at artificial intelligence or other sectors, the fact that we have 3 or possibly 4 of the world's top 10 universities in the UK just brings that added dimension in terms of the output from those universities, both the skills and the innovation that flows from them. But it's not just that. It's also, I think, the beauty of this nation, whether you can see in the wonderful architecture of Hampton Court or our rolling hills, our beautiful waterfronts. Creativity and design plays such an important role in the UK's strength in this sector. So I'm very pleased to welcome Thomas Heatherwick, who I think probably embodies that, one of the UK's most prolific designers, a truly global presence whose work can be admired from Tokyo to Shanghai to New York and, of course, here in London. Thomas, could you give us some of your thoughts about how heritage has influenced the designs you've placed around the world?
Well, thrilling to be here. I suppose I wanted to talk about 2 things, but really they both come down to a humanness, really. To me, there's 2 really powerful things about the UK that I can't really shake off. In that it's amazing to talk about how financially successful something can be and how efficient logistics and all of those sides of things. But these 2 sides is that really good businesses ultimately are based on ideas. And where do ideas come from? So that's one side. And the other side is humans are driven by emotion, not just numbers. And so we are cultural animals. We love to be in places that stimulate us and connect with us. And we've had a sort of dehumanizing revolution going on around the world in so many cities and towns. And one thing we're so lucky with here is the depth of culture, the depth of history has somehow, almost like the laying up of peat, or the sort of the nutritious layer that I learnt about really most clearly when we were commissioned to build the British Pavilion at the World Expo in Shanghai in 2010. And we were all, at the same moment, all over the planet, different design teams were being given the same brief. You know, show that Bulgaria is a good country to live in, is diverse, show that Australia is, show that the UK is, show that, and every country was saying that they're good for tourism, that they're diverse, that they've got lots of old history, and that they've got good food. Britain was saying it's got good food, which it now does. So we were stuck a little bit thinking, well, what's actually a different thing you can say? Because there were going to be 250 pavilions. Everyone had a pitch the size of a football pitch to do their thing. And the British government had given us half the budget of the other Western nations, but had told us, be in the top 5 out of the 250 pavilions. And so we tried to tune in, and we spoke to a friend of the studio who travels constantly and said, what's the thing about Britain? You know, what can we say that might be a fresh thing? Because we can go on about castles and queens again and again, but what's a truer thing that might surprise people? And she said to me, the different thing in the UK is eccentricity. And I remember thinking, we can't say that's why we're doing the British Pavilion, to be eccentric. But that taught me such a lesson. She was just saying, that's that different thing. And when I was little, I thought I wanted to be an inventor. And then I discovered that the word inventing had the word mad next to it. You're a mad inventor. And like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, if any of you have seen that film, But then actually look at the last 20 years, 25 years. The word invention has rocketed forwards. And invention comes actually from the confidence to question and be curious and look from a different angle. And that, to me, is the phenomenal thing in the UK. In just a few miles from here, there are some of the most confident people who aren't embarrassed to look stupid, who will ask the extraordinary question and therefore come up with an unusual approach. And that led us to build the world's biggest ever hairy building. And actually, we worked with Kew Gardens that gave us 250,000 seeds. So we made the Seed Cathedral. And even though we had half the budget of the other Western nations, we won the top prize at the Expo because we dared to not say the obvious things that everyone expected us to say. And I think Britain at its best has invention, has that ability for the maverick thought that actually is where businesses come from, and innovation, and what you want your employees to do, especially as we now have the rapid advance of AI. So for me, it's these two things. The place itself and us all needing culture to be anyone, whatever you do, and then actually ideas being the future.
Well, thank you. And do you know what? I often think, and I don't know whether you remember this during the Platinum Jubilee, that marvellous moment when Her late Majesty was in conversation with Paddington Bear. And I just thought only the United Kingdom could do that. And that was the sort of fusion of history, culture, and creativity together. I'm now going to ask Anya, you to come in. I'm conscious we're already, the clock is beginning to tick rapidly. Some of your reflections, given your huge experience as a business leader, label owner, and creative force, and bringing together luxury and sustainability under one roof. Perhaps you can add some of this.
Well, we're not very good, us Brits, at showing off, are we? But I think I feel lucky. I think you said the word lucky. And I echo that because it's a great place, I think, to be able to be creative and to have a business in the UK. Geographically, it's incredibly central between the East and the West in terms of time zones, language. Our laws are internationally respected around the world. And we do have this amazing, I think it's the mix, as you say, of history and modernity, where you really have that sense of being grounded and yet inspired at the same time. And that is very, very inspiring, I think, for creatives. I think that is probably why we have that confidence that you spoke about. I think that coupled with incredible institutions like our artistic schools, our museums, all of which really are hugely inspiring and they make it a very fertile place to work, really. So it's a very lucky place to be. And 1 in 5 jobs in London is in the creative sector. I mean, it's pretty phenomenal. So it's a great place to work in the creative industries.
Well, thank you. And actually, you talked about the skills. That's another thing. I think some of the world's top fashion colleges, I think at least 6 of the top 20 are in the UK. Again, that link between education and creativity. Perhaps I could bring Lord Lloyd Webber in now. I think Lord Lloyd Webber needs no introduction. And we spent a lot of time working together during the pandemic. What I would say is remind you that the British government put its money where its mouth was during the pandemic with the £2 billion Cultural Recovery Fund and indeed our commitment to sports as well. So there's been some talk of limited budgets. We were willing to put our money where our mouth was when it was really needed. But over to you, Lord Lloyd Webber.
Well, first thing, Oliver, I'm going to ask you a question because this is was interesting to see. I could ask the Chancellor the question, but I'm going to ask you. The Lion King is one of the most successful movies of all time. Its worldwide current gross is a staggering $970 million. What do you think the gross of The Lion King in the theatre currently is?
Well, I should say I've had a bit of advance warning on this because this is a point that Andrew would frequently make to me when I was Culture Secretary. So I'm unlike some of you may go below 900 million. I'm going to go above 900 million and go for about 3 billion.
It's $10.2 billion.
That gives you some sense of the scale.
That is what theatre can do. And that is why... I'm thrilled and honoured to be here because we have some of the major investors in the world. We also have with 3 former chancellors who I can say we have to thank the Prime Minister for when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer for introducing the first meaningful tax break for theatre, which I do hope will continue. But we need, theatre produces, for every pound, this is a statistic I got last week for London, for every pound that it generates in the theatre, it generates 1.4 pounds in the local economy. Theatre is, in my view, in the UK, an incredibly exciting and good investment. Broadway, sadly, and my first show ever to be put on stage was Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway in 1971. So I love Broadway, but it's now almost a vanity project, and the only shows that can really survive on Broadway are things that, like The Lion King or Hamilton, which are so huge that they can more than break even. But to put a musical on Broadway now would cost roughly $20 million. And I was speaking yesterday to Nick Scandalios, who runs the Nederlander organization, and we were just talking about the possibility of My Sunset Boulevard going this production to Broadway. And he was pointing out that the rough gross on Broadway, which it needs to break even on a musical now, is $970, very nearly $1 million a week. I mean, it's not a business. You can't, I mean, and that's why we are now producing shows in London, like the fantastic little musical, which I do suggest you go to, called The Little Big Things, which only Britain could come up with something like that. A musical, I mean, so moving that it's impossible to really put into words, but it's about a boy who was paralyzed from the neck downwards in a diving accident in Spain and learnt to paint with his mouth. And that's what the musical's about. Now, you're not going to find work like that coming on in any other place than London or the West End. So I passionately ask for 2 things, that the theatre is supported by government, a little more perhaps than it is at the moment, and I also passionately ask you, if you are thinking of investing, think of Britain first and think of our theatre.
Well, thank you, Andrew. And I think there's a sort of theme coming from this discussion about the uniqueness of how we do things in Britain. Alongside the creativity, there's been some talk about the need for additional investment. I think perhaps one area that has had an awful lot of investment, indeed thanks to many of you in this room, is the Premier League. When I go around the world as a minister, I'm always asked 2 things. Have you met the King or the Queen as was, and which Premier League team do you support? That is a sign of the cultural reach of the Premier League, and I'm delighted to be joined by Richard Masters, the man in charge of the Premier League. Welcome your thoughts and reflections on all of this.
Well, thank you for having me. A few words on the world of sport, and of course the UK is an incredible sporting nation. Football is the world sport, and English football is a very big player in the world of football. In fact, our research shows the Premier League, the world's most watched league, it is the single institution or single entity which makes the most people feel positive about the UK. So that's my little statistic. I'm particularly proud of that one. As you say, the Premier League's been very successful in attracting inward investment, both in terms of media rights from all around the world. We're telecast in over 180 territories, but also in terms of foreign ownership, with half of our clubs now being owned by foreign owners. Some people might say that's a controversial thing, but I think it's a good thing for the game. So how has the Premier League become such a successful football competition? It's done it because it's made itself relevant and interesting to a global audience at a time when football fans around the world have had almost ubiquitous access to live football. And we've done that in 3 ways, I think. We've ruthlessly focused on a great football competition. So we have some of the best players from around the world, the best coaches from around the world, melded with our homegrown talent and packed stadia. And we have a way of sharing money, which means everyone has a chance. So we have that incredibly important quality of jeopardy. So you don't know what's going to happen when you watch the match. Secondly, we lost my thread.
Man City doesn't always.
We've also looked for global appeal. So there's 3 billion people that support Premier League clubs from around the world. We're obviously extremely proud of that. £1.5 billion in export revenue coming in to Premier League productions. 300 people working down in Stockley Park. They are the greatest exporter you've never heard of. And finally, I think that we value authenticity. We've talked about that on the panel already. So football clubs are now global brands, but they're also deeply rooted in their communities. I'm from Birmingham. There are 2 clubs in that city. Aston Villa was set up in the 1870s, and the Villa fan out there, in the 1870s by the Wesleyan Chapel of Villa, which is where it gets its name from. And now it's owned by an American and Egyptian businessman. Brazilians, Spaniards, and Jamaicans take the field, but it's still the people of Birmingham that pack the stands, and that is incredibly valuable as well. So it's all of those things, I think, which add up to such successful products.
Well, it's interesting, and actually I think there's what you're hearing there, and indeed from all the panellists, is the deep-rooted nature of culture in this country as well. Indeed, it's something I saw when we were discussing the fortunately ill-fated plans for the European Super League. It's only the fact that our culture has the roots in this country that gives it its strength. But I was thinking as we were going across this panel, and we're already running out of time, but we have strength in the creative industries. Another area we have huge strength in the UK, and I'm sure you'll hear about this later today, is in technology. And indeed, the last major summit we had was in relation to artificial intelligence, another area where I believe the UK is as world-leading as it is in creative industries. I'd be interested in the panel's reflections on the synthesis between those two, between creativity and artificial intelligence. Is it a threat? Is it an opportunity? How do you see that playing out? I don't know who would like to go first. Neil, do you want to go first?
I think it's just fascinating that the UK it's all relevant in the discussion, because in terms of compute, there are only 2 AI superpowers, United States and China. But if you think about the real innovators in the sector, 2 of the most important figures, in my view, are Demis Hassabis and Mustafa Suleyman. And they are really, it seems to me, amongst the most important figures in the sector. So AI is something to which Britain's already made massive contributions. I think Mustafa's book is the best book on the subject. If you haven't read his book, I think you've missed out. And although everybody wants to talk about Sam Altman, I think Demis Hassabis is probably the single most important innovator, the data scientist who really made AI happen. And that's extraordinarily important. It's a little bit like Bletchley Park in World War II. In terms of scale, the United States and the Soviet Union were more important than the United Kingdom in World War II. But without Bletchley Park, it's not clear that the Allies would have won. That would be the analogy I would draw.
And I completely agree with that. And Thomas, do you want to come to it? Because I know indeed, we were at an event where you showed me your design for an automated car, which was totally radical. And I know you've engaged a lot with tech and creativity. What are your reflections on this?
We've been very lucky to work with Google over the last 9 years, building their headquarters in King's Cross as well as in Mountain View, where some of the amazing innovators of DeepMind and some of those teams are having some incredible meetings at the moment and working out what the future could be. But I think we've been using artificial intelligence in many ways in all our architecture projects for a long time. It's jumped to another level. But I do think that we don't need to panic in the same way, because it's true that you can ask it to do something and it can create building designs quickly, it can do all sorts of things. But the best projects come from actually innovation in the question that you ask. And often when somebody asks us, like we just finished a new island in New York that's a park, but we weren't asked to design an island. We were asked to design a pavilion on an existing design. But when we weighed up the use of the money that was about to be spent and the human experience that was actually the goal, we realized that there was a different question to ask, which wasn't what they thought they'd asked us. But if you'd asked a computer, they would have designed all sorts of options for the building instead of reinventing it as a new island. And so I think we just forget that it's the curiosity of asking the right question and stepping strategically right back. It's not just random creativity. It's strategy that leads to actually the best innovation.
Thank you. Well, look, I'm conscious we have already run out of time. We could continue this conversation for a very long period of time. I hope that it has stimulated your thoughts. I don't want to keep you waiting for the next session, which is the Prime Minister back again. I don't want to get in trouble with him. So I'm going to have to wrap up the panel now. But please, will you join me in giving your thanks to this brilliant panel of contributors?
Thanks so much for that last session. Some amazing thoughts there from the panel. I've got my high-tech Wordle machine here, which I'm jotting down thoughts as we go through the day, because this is about conversations that actually matter. The notion of education being a vital part of this country's success. I thought Thomas's points around human ideas, purpose, dare to say the thing that isn't obvious and sometimes be embarrassed, curiosity, eccentricity, and then Neil talking about innovation and Britain's way of innovating, which, to Lord Webber's point, allows access to inventiveness. I think you've got a real sense there, Anya as well, talking about the talent of the country. So, the next session will be between the Prime Minister. We are very, very grateful to Steve Schwarzman, the Chairman, Chief Executive and Co-founder of Blackstone, who's going to join us on the stage with the Prime Minister. And the event is going to be compared by my old colleague, the brilliant economist, the head of news economics at Bloomberg, Stephanie Flanders.
Thank you to everyone for being here. Just another day in the office. We've got so much to discuss, and I'm just going to get right into it, because I know that everyone here will be interested to hear your thoughts as leaders. We're going to kind of take stock of the state of the world, think a bit about the future, think a lot about the ingredients for growth and investment here and around the world. Prime Minister, I should start with you. You came to office at a time after a period of great domestic uncertainty in the UK. We've provided quite a lot of that over the last few years. But increasingly in the last year, it's global conflict, heightened tensions in Europe, Middle East, and China that have crowded the agenda. How has that changed the way you approach your job day to day?
Yeah. Well, I think, Stephanie, you're right. The global picture has become, I think, more uncertain and more challenging than at any time in recent history. It's one of the reasons I was delighted that David Cameron was rejoining government as Foreign Secretary. To have his relationships and experience at such a tricky time is enormously valuable to the government. But I think the way we've responded to it is, first of all, recognizing that you have to, in a sense, out-cooperate your adversaries. And that means deepening and strengthening our partnerships and alliances around the world. And I've spent the last year doing that. So we've signed new agreements with Japan, South Korea, and the US to strengthen both security and economic collaboration. I think maintained and restored much better relations with the EU through the Windsor Framework, which Chris helped negotiate, but also joining Horizon, which is the world's largest research collaboration. And then on the defense and security side, the AUKUS alliance between America, Australia, and the UK. So the year has been characterized by the UK engaging all around the world. I think Kemi talked about CPTPP earlier. Again, just an example of us strengthening our alliances in every part of the world. I think the second point is to recognize that the economic geography of the world is changing. And so for a country like the UK, it's important that we reorient ourselves to places like the Middle East, like Asia Pacific, which all those alliances speak to. And then lastly, when you have these difficult situations, it's remembering that we must stand up for our values, right? Whether it's the situation in Ukraine a little while ago or what Hamas did. These are moments for moral clarity, and the UK can play a leadership role in being very clear about the values that we stand for, and then robustly doing what's necessary to defend those values. So that's been our approach over the last year.
I mean, Steve, one thing that we look at a lot at Bloomberg, and we have economists and economic reporters and political reporters thinking about how the world is changing. For many years, there was in effect a sort of geopolitical tailwind for globalization, a period of calm, which is definitely gone. And our economists calculate that the economic cost of conflict this year is going to be, by the end of the year, is going to be higher than any year since 1945 for the world. So how does that change the way you, as a business leader, look at your global strategy?
Well, we look at our global strategy really from the perspective of inflation. As we've come off the pandemic, there's been enormous consumer spending, which has created inflation, and now that's created central banks around the world raising interest rates, affecting the behavior of all investments. And so we try and figure out who's going to be the winner and loser in that game. We see the U.S. as a good-sized winner. We've got quite a good growth rate. We see international stuff slowing down. There's no doubt that there's disinvestment in some countries, and we're looking for places where global growth will hold up, and I can see that in the UK, and we're anticipating declines in inflation, and I think we're getting that in the US, UK, for example. It's gone in half. That's like a real achievement, and we're coming into a more normalized world. After pandemics, it typically takes 5 years before you figure out what the impact of the pandemic actually was. And now we're going to see more normalization of interest rates over time, and that'll increase investment generally.
Just to follow up a little bit with Steve, the one thing that has really changed in the last 5 years is the relations between US and China. And you, I know, have been a sort of key intermediary in that relationship. I'm told that you were on the top table with Xi Jinping the other day.
Yeah, apparently that was the case. I was seated one.
I'd like to confirm that reporting. Right now.
Yeah. I was seated one away from him, next to another member of the standing committee. I would say that the meetings between the U.S. and China were reasonably successful. There was a good interaction between the two presidents. A lot of things were discussed. There were some reestablishment of relations between the countries, which really were cut off for over a year. Now there's sort of military cooperation. So if there are accidents, they could be controlled, which may not have been the case. There was some agreement on fentanyl, which is killing close to 100,000 Americans a year. Some discussion and agreements on AI, but also more of a we really want to engage from the Chinese side, which is quite a change from where we were.
Prime Minister, you mentioned David Cameron's return as Foreign Secretary. He was has been associated with a desire for much closer relations with China. Do you see that the mood shifting on that front?
I think if David was here, what he would say is that China of today is not the China that he dealt with over a decade ago. It has changed. It's right that our strategy evolves to take account of that. And look, our strategy can be summarized in three approaches. It's protect, align, and engage. You've got to protect the UK against the risks where they manifest themselves. So, for example, we've passed a new National Security and Investment Act, which allows us to block investment in sensitive sectors if we're not comfortable with it. We've used that in semiconductors, for example. The second leg is to align with our allies like the US, and I spend a lot of time talking to the President about their approach in the US, but also the Australians, the Japanese, and I believe our approach is aligned with our closest allies. And the last, as Steve said, is to engage. Because whether you like it or not, China is an indisputable fact of global economic life. There's no solution to the world's biggest problems, whether that's climate change, regulating AI appropriately and safely, tackling global public health, macroeconomic stability, without engaging China. And if you've taken the steps you need to protect yourselves, then you should be able to engage with confidence to the benefit of our country and those global norms. So I think we're very aligned on the approach.
So I want to get on to growth. One thing that all of the recent UK Prime Ministers have agreed on is we need to grow faster. Productivity has been a particular problem since the global financial crisis, but I think the GDP per head has grown half the pace of the US in the last 10 years or so. So what's the strategy for fixing that? How are you going to fix that?
I think that the first thing to say is if you look at since 2010, you talked about a decade or so, the UK, if you look at the G7 countries, the UK has grown faster than all European peers, faster than Japan. So yes, behind the US and Canada, but remember we've had an energy crisis, and unlike the US and Canada, we are energy importers, not exporters. So I think that growth track record over the past decade is strong. But you're right, we want it to be higher. We've all seen a slowdown. I think for us, the emphasis is on investment. If you look at our productivity gap to some of our competitors, you can see that a large chunk of that productivity gap is explained by lower business investment. That's characterized the UK economy for decades, and we are now taking the steps to fix that. So the Chancellor last week, as I talked about, made full expensing permanent in this country. Right? That's something that lots of advanced economies do to help stimulate an economy in the short term. We've made that incredibly generous tax regime permanent. So every pound people are investing, they'll get 25% straight back in tax reliefs. That's very generous, and I think it will actually help galvanize growth going forward. And if you look at it, I introduced a temporary version of that a few years ago. Since that moment, we've had faster growth in business investment than any G7 country. So I think that's early signs of progress. There's a long way to grow, but if we want faster growth, we need more investment, and we're now cutting taxes on that to make it happen. But it's not just tangible capital, it's also intangible and R&D. So we've also cut taxes significantly for those businesses that are investing in R&D, because ultimately, our future growth comes from all of you innovating and creating the ideas and products and services of the future. So, where you're investing in that, we want to cut your taxes to do it. And again, that's something that will pay dividends down the line.
Steve, there has been this sort of a major effort to sort of change the structure of the US economy, at least to some extent, and particularly in response to the climate challenge, increase investment under the sort of Bidenomics and the IRA in the US. Do you think that is a model? What lessons do you think we're learning from that?
Well, we have this law called the IRA that doesn't have much to do with inflation reduction, actually.
Actually, over here we tend to call it ERA now.
And we're currently running deficits of $2 trillion a year I think it's somewhere around 8% of GDP. I'm not sure that's a model that everyone would run out and duplicate. And we're trying to deal with it ourselves. I think there's some really good elements in that in terms of the commitment to renewables and a more predictable environment for investing in those kinds of areas. But I don't know whether I would recommend that to the UK.
What is the UK's answer? Because we've talked a lot about having an answer to the era.
So I think, look, the first thing to say is that since the baselines were set, the UK has decarbonised faster than pretty much any other major economy, right? So we've cut carbon emissions here over that period by 50%. I think, Europe is around 30, Japan 7. The US basically has not cut them at all over that period. And they've obviously gone up significantly in China. So our starting point for this conversation is one where we've done a really good job here, right? And we can be very proud of that. And it's great that actually other countries are now feeling they need to catch up. I think that's a good thing for the world. So where there are spillovers that reduce the cost of these technologies for everyone else, that's a positive thing. Now, I tend to agree with Steve. For a country and economy like the UK, I think an approach that has got significant deficit-funded subsidies is not good. Right? I don't think subsidy races are sensible. I'm a free market person. I believe in a free economy. Government's role is to create the conditions for the private sector through regulation or other means to make the investments that are necessary. The tax policy is an example of that. Sensible regulation, our contracts for difference pricing model for offshore wind has proven to be very successful, now copied around the world. And that would generally be my approach to these questions. And look, I think the proof is in the pudding. We've attracted, I think, almost £200 billion of investment in these industries over the past several years. We've decarbonised, and we've just overtaken France in terms of the size of our manufacturing sector, right? Leading in technologies like offshore wind and now carbon capture and storage. So again, that's not something people often associate with the UK, but the fact that we've now overtaken France for the size of our manufacturing sector gives you a sense that our approach is working. And I think, as I said, Steve would rightly point out, I think the UK was running deficits on a regular basis. It's not a reserve currency. I think people would say that's probably not the right sensible policy. And I think what happens when you do that? You drive up inflation, you drive up interest rates, people's mortgages, and ultimately, that just means higher taxes down the line. One of my predecessors and their chancellor said, borrowing is just deferred taxation. And we in this country want to bring our borrowing down, get to a sustainable level, and cut people's taxes and unleash all of you to invest and innovate. That's our approach.
Though sadly, the debt has had to continue to rise over the last 10 years. Steve, I think at the last of these summits, you were sort of voicing some disquiet about the pace of the move to net zero, some of the pledges that have been made by the government. So are you pleased that, as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak has sort of slowed the pace a bit on some of those commitments?
Well, I'm not involved in the UK internal politics business. That's really outside of my remit. But I think that the trend of movement in that area is good, and it's an important concept for the entire world. Everybody knows, particularly in the States, we have really bizarre changes in weather all over. And I don't think there's almost anyone left who doesn't believe that climate is a truly important thing that has to be addressed. And every country finds their own way to it. What's really important is we need to bring in China and India, because without those two countries, the great efforts that everybody is trying to make really end up falling short, which is why we need important relationships in those areas.
Well, when you say you don't get involved in domestic politics, I think we've got a good example of that. Just over a year ago, you announced the big expansion of your headquarters right in the middle of the sort of market turmoil over the mini budget and other things in the UK. So what is it that's so great about the UK that you can ignore all of that uncertainty?
Yeah, well, we sort of try and look through what we regard as short-term, issues. And, for us in the long term, we've had a terrific experience in the UK. We have 70 billion pounds of investment here, which I think makes us, for foreigners, certainly one of the biggest. We have 37,000 people working in companies where we have investments. We've actually had a lot of fun. I mean, we own the London Eye and Madame Tussauds, and we've a lot of big part of the tourism consumer economy. We're very involved in social and affordable housing. We've done 23,000 houses. We just invested £1 billion to buy another company that'll be doing another 1,500 or 1,900 of those kind of homes. That was a week ago, 2 weeks ago. We just bought a software company here that actually does a lot of supply to the government to digitize government affairs. And there's always something fascinating for us to do here. The life science area in the UK is like an incredible leader. The idea that you created the crick out of whole cloth. This is some amazing, if you're not familiar with it, amazing facility with scientists and tied in with Cambridge, and it's really a unique kind of opportunity to get involved with things. And I'm involved with Oxford from a charitable perspective personally, and the universities here spin off all kinds of interesting things and are just enormous resources. So as we look, we've been sort of headquartered here for 23 years, and we were sort of bursting at the seams, and we said, okay, what do we do here? By the way, for those without language skills, English is a tremendous advantage. And I didn't do well in school, in French. Most people in America don't have multi-language ability. So being located here, with all the advantages that it has, we basically stayed on Berkeley Square, where we're located now, and now we're doing a building for the whole southern part of it. It's going to be the largest building constructed in Mayfair in the last several decades. So we're like quite happy here.
It's interesting when you talk about, how much does the tax regime matter to you because we spend so much time when we're talking about attracting investment about, and corporate taxes have gone up, they've gone down, we've got rid of incentives, then we put them back in. Does it really affect your decision when you're thinking about that investment?
Well, I think it's got to be in a certain zone, and something that people in government may not be as sensitive to is people like us need consistency. We need to be able to trust what's going to be happening without huge lurches where sometimes things can go wrong. And the UK's been quite good about that. So it's pretty much a pro-business place. It varies a little bit with different sort of administrations, but fundamentally pro-business and reliable. And English common law. There are a lot of places we operate which don't have laws. They have the law of custom, and when that custom changes, it's really scary. That's something that people underrate. I have a simple rule that I only like to invest in places that I'm willing to visit twice. There are a lot of interesting places in the world to visit, but, coming back to the UK, it does have the #1 tourist economy in Europe.
I think we've learned that you're going twice in the next 24 hours, let alone anything else. Prime Minister, you talked about the importance of people in your opening remarks, and we've sort of heard about some of the great talent of the UK in the previous session. But, economists are now thinking of this across the main. It's not just about education when you think about the quality of the workforce. It's health, it's inactivity, it's skills. So how are you going to tackle that in a quite constrained financial environment?
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, Steve, thanks for what you said. And Alex, who's our Lord Chancellor and is in charge of our legal profession, was particularly happy about your remarks on the common law, which we would agree does not get enough recognition. I think, look, for us, we've had a rise in inactivity since the pandemic, and we're determined to bring it back down. Now, part of that is supporting those who can work to work, right? And we are investing record sums in therapies with the NHS to provide, to your point, a more holistic approach to it, to get people the treatment and support they need. But at the same time, making sure that our welfare system is fair to those who are paying for it. And ultimately, lots of people are working very hard, paying for welfare. And if someone is able to work, then they should be working. And we're going to make sure that the system reflects those values. And I think what you'll see is that will move people off welfare and into work and reduce economic inactivity because of that joined-up approach. But I do think, and I've said it repeatedly, I think the closest thing in public policy that we have to a silver bullet is education. And if you can create a world-class education system, you are well on your way to resolving most of the challenges that we as policymakers face in whatever sphere you find them. But education isn't just about what happens up to 18 or indeed 21. Right? Education is something that happens throughout your life. And particularly as the economy is evolving, we need to make sure that we have an education and skills system that can equip, upskill, retrain people at any stage in their careers. And that's what we're doing. I think we're making sure that our approach not only is well-beating at school with more focus on STEM subjects, which we are investing more in, but also, if you want to pick up a new qualification in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s, that the way we do student finance and the way that government policy works, that we've got your back at that moment, right? Because if you're someone who wants to work hard and build a better career for you and your family, then government should have your back. And that's what we need to reorient the system towards, and that's what we're doing. So instead of it being, here's your student loan that you can get at 18 to just go and do a 3-year university degree, it's, here's the account that you've got that the government is going to support you with, and you can dip in and out of that throughout your life. And actually, you might want to build a more modular approach to your skills over your life that will suit you and your career. We now can do that, and that's what we're rolling out. And I think that can be absolutely transformative. And if we can get that right, and again, not many countries have done that, but I think we're on the cutting edge of how to do it.
And I mean, as you said before, you also have this challenge of making sure that the deficit's not going up, and you have the constrained financial environment. And even on education, I noticed from last week's autumn statement, you've got sort of core school spending per pupil is going to have to be flat in real terms. I mean, how do you get that world-class education for that?
Because I think the first thing, Stephanie, to say is if you look at our spending on primary, secondary education as a percentage of GDP, it's pretty much the highest in the G7. If you look at it per capita, it's higher than the average, well above the average of the OECD and the EU. So we already spend, relative to all our peers, actually a significant amount on education. The mistake is to say that the outcomes are a direct function of how much money you're spending. Right? And I think that is the trap that we shouldn't fall into. Because if you, like me, believe in having a more dynamic, smaller state, that it's working more effectively, efficiently, and productively so that you can lower the tax burden, you can't accept that premise. Right? So actually, what I look at is, hang on, how do we improve the productivity of what the public sector is doing? Technology gives us the opportunity, particularly in education, to transform outcomes, right? If you look at what AI is already doing, right, the promise of every child having a personal tutor, which was always the holy grail of education policy, right? We know that that is transformative for people's attainment, particularly disadvantaged kids. Obviously, in an analog world, that's not scalable, it's not affordable. With AI, there is the potential for that to be completely scalable and cost efficient. And we're already rolling out tools that support teachers to improve their time in the classroom. And we can roll out those kind of tools more generally. You can see a world in which, of course, we're going to keep investing in education, but we should see that decoupled from the incredible performance. And that's the track record in this country over the past decade. And actually, we've marched up all the international league tables for reading, for maths, for science, and it shows that actually focusing on standards, how you teach, and the quality of the teaching can be far more important and determinative than just how much money you're throwing into the system. You know, throwing more money into an unreformed system is not the path to success.
Now, and I know you also, everyone wanted to talk about AI. Steve, we've had, in fact, the last big shindig that the Prime Minister had was a few weeks ago on AI safety, but should we also be focused on AI opportunity? How are you looking at it at Blackstone?
Yeah, I'd like to just say one thing about education. You know, most of the people who have been successful in my country really came from the middle class, and including myself. And, you know, for all of us, education is the passport for a better life. And I believe that that's a core element of any liberal democracy. You know, I've given $1 billion personally to charities for education. So I really believe this stuff, and it's truly important. And what goes along with this is the question you just asked on AI. And I've been involved with AI since 2015. I was on a bus in China sitting next to Jack Ma. Obviously, it wasn't a random bus. Jack started talking to me about AI, and I didn't even know what he was talking about. And you know, he was a good teacher. You know, I think he actually started as a teacher. And so he gave me the brief on AI. And I have a program in China called the Schwarzman Scholars. It's like the Rhodes. So I know a lot of heads of universities. So I talked to the head of MIT about what Jack said. And he said, well, we invented AI at MIT. And so everyone you're going to meet at this stage in the development either went to MIT or was taught by somebody who went to MIT. And so I had a ringside seat as a non-technologist to see what's going to happen with this technology. And it's going to be pretty extraordinary in terms of its impact. You know, part of the expectation is that just in education, this will allow for customized education for people all over the world, as long as you have a smart device, which even in the developing world, most people have smart devices. So we're going to be able to have, over time, a real jump start in education and in many other fields. There'll be chances to apply AI to government and introduce levels of efficiency, which I think, you know, will help you with your budget issues, and that'll also affect the commercial world, which we're all in, where there'll be all kinds of cost-saving opportunities, efficiency opportunities, as well as revenue development areas. And, you know, this is exploding with growth. And to just give you a quick idea, we bought a company 2 years ago called QTS. It manufactures data centers. We paid $10 billion for this company, and in 2 years, it's now 6 times bigger. May this all happen to you once in your career. But I say that just as an example, because this is part of the infrastructure support system, you know, for the hyperscalers. Yeah. And, you know, we become the #1 AI data center company in the world. The scale of this revolution and its impact with massive increases in power and efficiency in short periods of time. This is not for your children. This is for you in our lifetimes, our working lifetimes, over the next 5 to 10 years. And so it's truly an area with huge amount of commercial application.
I mean, Prime Minister, Britain has often actually been in the forefront of sort of experimentation in some of these big global shifts, whether it's privatization or financial liberalization. Is this one of those ones, when you think about what the potential risks are, is it one that you want to be in the front, or is it one that we might want to be waiting back a bit? Do you worry about the risks?
No, I absolutely think we want to be shaping and leading that conversation, and that's what the AI Summit was about, and I think it showed that we could. Right? This is the only place that the leading large language models all have an international office. Outside of the US and China, who obviously are the undisputed leaders, the UK is the next country with the most research citations, most venture capital raised in AI. Obviously, DeepMind, and Demis is here somewhere, is headquartered here. So I think we start with an incredible foundation in this technology, which I completely agree with Steve about the scale of the transformation that is about to happen. We just need to make sure that we can capitalize on that, which we're doing all the right things. The Chancellor just announced significant investment in compute capacity. Steve talked about the infrastructure required to enable this innovation. You need compute capacity. We're now investing considerably in that. But also regulation. And this is, again, a good example of the UK's position helping us shape the future. Like, we have the autonomy to be able to move quickly, flexibly about regulating these industries of the future. And I think most people in the room who have had experience of us, whether it's in financial services or life sciences, would say, look, we get this right? Obviously, there's need for consumer protection and guardrails, but we approach these things from a principles basis rather than the micro-managing approach of others. And because we do it that way, and because we approach it with a pro-innovation bent, like, this makes this an incredible place for those entrepreneurial, innovative companies to come and experiment, and that's what we're set about doing. And I genuinely think we can play a leadership role here. Right? We hosted that conference at Bletchley Park deliberately. Right? Like, this is a country, when it comes to computer science, we have, this is one of the founding fathers of it, was British. We've helped create a lot of the science and the research that's underlied this. And MIT, great, but we have them here too as well. And I think we shouldn't be afraid of championing it and actually going for that leadership role.
I'd say that being a last adopter on AI is a tragic error commercially. This is a field where the first movers will be able to get efficiencies when other people don't have them. And you can use those efficiencies both in revenue creation and also on the cost level to create a much more competitive company than a competitor would have. And once you get that jump start, it's very hard for someone else to catch up. And so I think there's going to be a lot of pressure for early adoption.
All right, I'm looking at the flashing lights. I'm going to fail in my main duty, which is to get everyone onto their breakouts. But Steve Schwarzman, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, thank you very much.
Everyone seems to have got up. 1 second, everyone. Just 1 second. I know everyone's got up, but just want to give you a few brief reminders. The one-on-one meetings. Do visit the showcase. Do go and meet government departments from the UK in the opportunity zones. The sessions start promptly in a few minutes with Lord Cameron, geopolitics and the global economy, the future of manufacturing. Lunch at 12:30, incredibly important, and then back here, 3 o'clock for a 3:15 start. Thank you, everybody.
you.